Hi, and welcome to today's episode of In Our Shoes. I'm Nathan, and I will be your main host today. Alongside me are my co hosts, Cassie and Chloe. We are talking about a very important and timely topic today: the effects of race in organizations and at work. The main text for this discussion is Picking Worms by Suvankam Thamavongsa. This short story is a deep, emotional dive into work, identity, and the struggles of racially marginalized people in the workplace.
Yes, exactly, Nathan. An overarching theme will be about how race shapes the experiences people have at work when it comes to barriers and biases of racial minorities. More specifically, we will talk about if these experiences are related to systemic inequities, such as glass ceilings, racial discrimination, and whether things like pay disparity or hiring practices are indeed linked.
We'll also get into some real-world data and research that show how race shapes job opportunities and career advancement. By making the study of race tangible, we hope to uncover how race shapes the culture of the workplace and the lives of workers beyond the workplace. Given the experience of Filipinos and Visayans, this conversation means so much to us.
To begin with, I think Picking Worms really spoke to me because it expresses the unfiltered realities that people who are on the outskirts of the working world have to face. In the story, the narrator's family toils harvesting worms, a backbreaking and humiliating task that denoted their lower rank in the social hierarchy. It paints a vivid picture of this systemic racial inequity that plays out in the labor force as well, with people from minority communities often relegated to the hardest and least lucrative jobs. But what I found especially striking was how the narrator's experience represented not just physical labor, but also the emotional costs associated with being shunted to the margins. I think the moment in the story that struck me is when the narrator, as a child, describes watching her mom work and the ways race and racialized social class determine someone's entire life course, especially with regards to careers.
Absolutely. This is a potent reminder of how race can constrain opportunities, often beginning in childhood. I have read about how workplace racial discrimination can impact career trajectories. Research shows that racial minorities don't hold as many senior jobs as white subjects in Canada. Racial minorities tend to be less likely to be accorded promotions or go up the corporate ladder, with many employees being under the pressure of a glass ceiling, as per results from the Employment Equity Promotion Rate Study. This refers to an unseen barrier to advancement, even for those who are qualified. Minorities are often subjected to even more oversight when it comes to promotions and job evaluations.
In a study I found from the Pew Research Center, the discussion was about African Americans in STEM fields and how much they feel overlooked or discriminated against in the workplace. The new study concluded that discrimination, both implicit and explicit, continues to occur with many industries. These results struck me especially hard because STEM is a field that is often believed to be meritocratic. Race still really matters even in places that should, at least in theory, be based on talent and skill. Picking Worms reflects those same barriers in a different context, but its theme is clear. Minority groups often find themselves trapped in low-status, menial jobs without any means to get out of those jobs permanently.
And that gets us into the research findings that enhanced my understanding of the text. I found one piece from the Canadian Human Rights Commission, which talks about how more organizations are recognizing the need for anti-racism policies. Despite these initiatives, the reality is that many companies still operate on systems that disadvantage racial minorities. This research emphasized the role of systemic barriers that prevent equal opportunities in the workplace, which is directly connected to the experience described by the narrator in Picking Worms. One study I reviewed addressed the underrepresentation of people of color in corporate leadership positions. 95% of the Fortune 500 CEOs are white men. According to the UCSC's Who Rules America report in 2020, 85.8% of all CEOs in America were white men. The absence of senior leadership diversity creates a chain reaction and seeps down to hiring practices and workplace culture.
I agree with you, Nathan. The story in Picking Worms is a great commentary on the lack of vertical mobility and the plight of marginalized and disadvantaged populations. I found this article on how to advance racial equity in the workplace, Harvard Business Review. You have a lot on your plate. This article shows how organizations can do better than just optics, like changing hiring practices and making sure recruitment panels are not just token diverse. This effort made clear to me that while we absolutely need diversity initiatives, they're often meaningless if they're not tackling the root causes of inequality, such as systemic bias and discrimination.
That's an interesting point, Cassie. According to my research, I found a YouTube video from the University of Toronto that talks about ethnic sounding names and what effect they could have on hiring. This study found that applicants with names that sounded ethnically distinctive, such as the names of people from immigrant communities, were less likely to get an interview, even with the same qualifications as their counterparts with Western sounding names. And this links directly to what is happening to the narrator in Picking Worms. The absence of opportunity based on the most surface level, arbitrary, completely ungovernable elements of a person's existence, such as their ethnicity or social class.
So, all this research really expanded my understanding of how race is an experience larger than the individual. That is more personal, that is structural, embedded in systems. Picking Worms gives us a snapshot of that reality, how race plays in framing work visibly and invisibly. I'm now able to look at the story as an allegory for the plight of racial minorities on a wider scale than manual labor, to encompass nearly all professional fields. The barriers are real, whether the lack of representation in high positions or the subtle biases in hiring.
This research has been great for me in understanding that systemic racism is not only a workplace issue, but systemic racism is also an issue in education. Racial minorities generally do not have access to the same quality of education and resources, affecting their job prospects later on. It's a cycle of inequality that reproduces itself, and it's tougher for people to escape that cycle unless there's a real institutional change. It's something that really stood out to me in Picking Worms as well, where the narrator's family is trapped in this work cycle that doesn't let them break through or get ahead.
One of the most interesting things to me is how small actions, changing a name on the top of a resume, ensuring that hiring panels are racially diverse, add up to something larger and promote racial equity. This relates to my own story because I've experienced similar hardship and that I have felt the pressure of being judged as a potential candidate based on my surname or ethnicity. I realized that even mild forms of discrimination can have lingering effects on those people, and that it's something that I need to pay attention to now and the future.
So, in conclusion, our research has allowed us to create a richer, more nuanced picture of how race affects the way people experience work, from hiring to how jobs progress. We've seen how systemic inequalities continue to hold back racial minorities in many aspects of professional life, as evidenced in Suvankam Thamavongsa's Picking Worms. The piece dares us to grapple with the uncomfortable reality that race remains a powerful determinant of opportunity, and that is something we all must work toward changing together.
Exactly, Nathan. Through analyzing the text and research, we've been able to point out some very real issues that impact many people of color today. To make progress towards becoming an equitable workplace for all, we must start by identifying and understanding the root causes of inequalities in the workplace.
Thanks for listening, and we hope this conversation will offer you new ways to think about race, work, and systemic inequalities.